Hello, and welcome back on your mathematical journey. So today we're going to look at an inequality word problem. Let's take a peek. It says entrance to the fair costs $5. Ferris wheel costs $2 per ride. How many Ferris wheel rides can Bob get for $20? So for us to get started, the first thing we want to think about is what would be an expression or a way to compute the amount of money it would cost if I told you how many rides Bob was taking. Take a second to think about it. Okay, so if I told you Bob took, let's say, I don't know, we'll say 12 rides, right? How would you compute it, right? You would take the 12 rides, you would multiply it by the $2 per ride, and then we would have to add in that it costs $5 to get into the fair as well. So more generally speaking, instead of knowing the amount of rides ahead of time, we'll let R, in this case, for sure, equal to the number of rides. So, if I told you how many rides he took, we would take that number R, we would multiply it by 2, right? That would tell us how much that part costs, and then we would have to add on the $5 it costs to get into the fair. So an expression, we would say, a mathematical expression for the amount of money Bob spent at the fair for taking R rides would be 2R plus 5. And so in this case, well, what do we need to be true? Well, we know that if this is the total cost, we know that at most, right, he can only spend $20. So we want to compare this to $20, but we don't necessarily know if he's going to be able to spend all of it. So we can't quite say equals here, but since we know he will always have at least $20, we want this amount to be no greater than this, right? Because he can't spend money he doesn't have, unfortunately. So this is the equation we come up with in this case, the inequality rather. And so let's see if we can now isolate for the variable r. Well, the first thing we can do is we can subtract 5 from both sides, right? We can think about undoing or reversing sort of the adding 5 here. Right? The plus 5 minus 5 will cancel. That will leave us with 2r over here. Will leave us with the divided by here. Or I'm sorry, not divided by, less than. That will stay. And then 20 minus 5 will be 15. And lastly, if we want to isolate for the variable r, right, we want to think about sort of undoing this multiplying by 2, and the opposite of multiplying is dividing. So we will divide both sides by 2. And that will leave us with r, right? 2 divided by 2 is 1, so 1r, or r, is less than. And here we could either leave it as 15 over 2 if we wanted a fraction. If we wanted to punch that into a calculator, right, you could end up with the decimal 7.5. These would be equivalent answers in this case, since this is an exact decimal for this fraction. And so we know that Bob can take no more than 7.5 rides. So now, right, if we translate that into practice, right, Bob can never take half of a ride. So an equivalent statement in this case, we could write it two different ways. We could either leave it in this form. We could also say, right, that we could say that r is less than 8, right? Because in this case, since we can't take fractions of a ride, and this might make more sense to think about, the other way we could express this is that r is less than or equals to 7, right? We basically want to say that he can take at most 7 rides. That is, right, the largest integer or whole number that we can represent with this inequality. So in this case, Bob can take at most 7 rides. Hope that helps. If you have any questions, feel free to ask in the comments. Otherwise, have a good day and happy mathing.